Let me show you something most people will never admit about themselves. You're sitting there, phone in hand, watching those three dots appear. She's typing. Your chest tightens. You wait. The message comes through. Something casual, nothing urgent. And before you even finish reading it, your thumbs are already moving. You fire back instantly. No delay, no pause, just immediate response. And the moment you hit send, you feel it. That hollow ache in your chest. Because deep down, you know what you just communicated. You know what that zero latency signal just told her about your life. Have you ever noticed how your thumb hovers over the send button when she texts? What is that anxiety really about? The anxiety is about something darker, the gnawing terror that if you're not constantly available, you will be forgotten. This inability to tolerate silence is a measure of how you see yourself. Every instant reply is a signal. Not the signal you think you're sending, not "I care about you" or "I'm interested." The signal is, "I have nothing else in my life competing for my attention. You are the most important thing happening to me right now. I was waiting for you to text." And that signal, it's killing your chances before the conversation even begins. Think about the last woman who texted you back instantly, every time, without fail. The one who was always available, always eager, always ready to drop everything the moment you reached out. How did that make you feel? Did it make you want her more? Or did it quietly communicate that she didn't have much else going on? Be honest, didn't some part of you lose interest the moment you realized you'd already won? Now flip it. Think about the person who takes 3 hours to respond. The one who seems to have a life that doesn't revolve around their phone. Whose attention feels like something you have to earn, not something freely given. Doesn't that feel different? Doesn't that attention feel more valuable? What if I told you that your texting patterns, those split-second decisions about when and how to respond, are communicating more about your psychological state than anything you actually write? What if the speed of your reply matters more than the content? What if your availability is quietly broadcasting your scarcity mindset to everyone you message? There's a reason you keep repeating this pattern, a reason you can't help but respond immediately even when you know it makes you seem desperate. And it's darker than you think. It's not really about her at all. It's about the wound beneath the behavior, the belief you've been carrying since childhood that you're only worth remembering if you're constantly present, that love is something you have to earn through immediate availability, that if you're not right there, instantly responsive, you'll be replaced by someone who is. Your phone has become a prison. And the cruelest part? You're both the prisoner and the jailer. I'm going to show you exactly how this works. The 4 texting patterns that reveal your scarcity mindset to anyone paying attention. The psychological framework that explains why instant replies create contempt instead of connection. And the paradox at the heart of all of this, the reason that giving less attention actually makes you more valuable. This isn't about manipulation tactics or making her chase you. This is about what your texting behavior reveals about how you see yourself. And until you understand that signal, the one you're broadcasting every time you respond instantly, you'll keep wondering why interest fades so quickly. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you let a text sit for even an hour before responding? When was the last time you had something in your life compelling enough that you didn't notice the notification immediately? When was the last time your attention felt like something valuable enough to require patience? If you can't answer those questions, that's the problem. And that's exactly what we're about to fix. Because there's a truth buried here. One that explains everything about modern dating, digital communication, and why the people who care the least seem to win the most. But you're not ready for it yet. First, I need to show you what you're actually doing wrong. The 4 destructive patterns where the zero latency signal is quietly sabotaging your chances before you even realize what you're doing. Pattern 1, the double text panic. She doesn't respond for 2 hours. You send a follow-up, "Hey, did you see my last message?" Or just checking in. That her silence creates anxiety in you. That you can't tolerate the uncertainty. That you need her response to regulate your emotional state. About how much of your emotional stability is dependent on her validation. Pattern 2, the essay reply syndrome. She sends you 3 words. You send back 3 paragraphs. The effort imbalance is staggering. But you can't help it. You want to keep the conversation going, to give her something substantial to respond to prove you're interesting and engaged. What you're actually proving is that you're more invested than she is, that you're working harder, that you need this conversation more than she does. The investment gap reveals the power dynamic. You are crafting longer messages, obsessing over the perfect wording. She fires back one-word responses without a second thought. This communicates that you're more invested than she is. Pattern 3. The self-sabotaging apology. You take 4 hours to respond because you're actually busy, because you're trying to create healthy space, and then you apologize for it. Sorry for the late reply. What are you apologizing for? For having a life? For not being constantly available? You just undermined the entire benefit of the delay by signaling that you feel guilty about it. Why do you feel the need to apologize for not being instantly available? What belief about your worth makes you think that your time, your attention, your life existing independently is something requiring an apology? Pattern 4. The good morning text trap. You wake up and immediately text her, every single morning, like clockwork. You think it's sweet. You think it shows consistency and interest. What it actually shows is that she's the first thing you think about when you open your eyes. That your day doesn't begin with you. It begins with her. That you're orbiting her reality instead of creating your own. Begin your day in your own presence. Do not start with the anxiety of whether she's thinking about you. The dynamic is clear. Each scenario is about the same underlying pattern. You're outsourcing your sense of worth to her responsiveness. Your attention is cheap because you're giving it away without any internal filtration. But this isn't really about texting at all. The texting is just the symptom. Let's look at the reframe. Here is what you think is happening when you text her back instantly. You're being responsive, showing interest, proving you care. That's the surface story. But let's look at what's actually happening beneath that surface. Pillar 1. The meta-message paradox. When you text, "Hey, that sounds great, I'd love to do that," the content is positive. But when that message arrives 3 seconds after she sent hers, the meta-message is something else entirely. It's saying, "I was waiting for this. I have nothing else occupying my attention. My life has space for you to fill immediately." The meta-message is louder than the content. It's the signal beneath the words. And it's the signal that determines attraction. You can craft the perfect response. You can be witty. You can be charming. None of it matters. The delivery speed communicates desperation. The implicit message overpowers the explicit one every time. Pillar 2. The zero-latency definition. Latency is the delay between stimulus and response. In computing, zero latency means instant processing with no wait time. In human psychology, zero latency means you respond to external stimulus without any internal filtering, without your own life creating natural delay. When you text back instantly, you're broadcasting a zero latency signal. You're communicating that her message is the most significant thing happening in your reality right now. That there's no competing priority, no meeting you're focused on, no project absorbing your attention, no friend you're present with, no internal life rich enough to create even a brief delay. You're signaling, "I'm available, always, immediately, waiting." Think about how this plays out in economics. What happens to the price of something when supply massively exceeds demand? It crashes. The resource becomes worthless. Your instant availability is creating the same dynamic with your attention. You're flooding the market with supply, which destroys perceived value. Contrast that with someone who takes 3 hours to respond. The implicit meta-message: "I have a life that exists independent of this conversation. My attention is divided between multiple valuable things." You're important, but you're not the only thing. The one whose attention feels scarce is always the more valuable person. Pillar 3. The fear attraction inversion. Here is the central inversion. You think instant replies show you care, but what they actually show is that you're afraid. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid that if you're not immediately present, you'll be replaced. And fear is the opposite of attraction. Fear broadcasts, "I believe I'm replaceable. I believe that if I'm not constantly present, I'll be forgotten. I believe my value is so low that I need to compensate with availability." That's not attractive. That's not confidence. That's a man who doesn't trust his own worth to survive a moment of silence. The zero-latency signal is a fear transmission disguised as enthusiasm, and she feels it. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere in her nervous system she registers, this person is afraid of losing me, which means they don't believe they deserve me. Until you see that deeper pattern, until you understand what's actually driving this compulsion, you can't change it. You'll just keep repeating it with different people, wondering why the same outcome keeps finding you. The deeper pattern lives beneath your awareness. It's time to look at the wound beneath the behavior. Here's the truth you don't want to hear. Your instant replies aren't about communication. They're about control. Specifically, they're about controlling the one thing that terrifies you most: abandonment. Phase 1. The abandonment control. The zero-latency signal, this compulsion to respond immediately, isn't about the other person. It's about you. About the shadow you've been running from since you were too young to have language for it. Jung called it the shadow. The parts of yourself you can't accept, so you repress them, deny them, project them onto others. And one of the most common shadows we carry, especially in the context of relationships, is the terror of being unlovable. The belief that we're not enough, that our inherent worth isn't sufficient to hold someone's attention. When you were a child, you learned something devastating. You learned that love was conditional, that attention had to be earned. Maybe your parents were emotionally unavailable, present in body but absent in presence. You learned that to get their attention, you had to perform. You had to be immediately responsive to their needs. You internalized the belief that you were only worth remembering when you made yourself useful. Or maybe it was subtler than that. Maybe you just never felt seen for who you were. Maybe you learned that your authentic self wasn't interesting enough to hold anyone's gaze, that you had to constantly be on, constantly entertaining, constantly available, or you'd fade into the background of someone else's life. That's the wound, that original abandonment, not necessarily physical but psychological, the felt sense that you're alone in the world unless you actively prevent it through constant availability. And now, decades later, you're still running from that wound. Every instant text reply is an attempt to control the outcome, to prevent the abandonment from happening again, to prove over and over that you're worth keeping around. Phase 2. The self-abandonment paradox. Here is the paradox. The very behavior you're using to prevent abandonment is the behavior that causes it. Let me show you how this works. Imagine a projector in the back of a theater, casting the entire scene onto the screen. The play you're watching isn't real. It's an illusion created by light and shadow. The projector is your wound. The scene it's casting is your fear of abandonment. And you've been so focused on the play, on her responses, her interest, her attention, that you never turned around to look at the projector. You never realized that the story you're reacting to is one you're creating. When she doesn't text back immediately, you panic. You project your fear onto her silence. She's losing interest. She's talking to someone else. She's going to leave. Most of the time, she's just living her life, but your wound speaks instead. You can't know, but your shadow assumes the worst. Because that's what the wound does. It scans for evidence of abandonment, and when it finds even the slightest gap in communication, it fills that gap with your deepest fear. So you text back instantly. You keep the conversation alive. You prevent the silence from forming. Because silence feels like disappearance, and disappearance feels like death. You're not responding to her. You're responding to the scared child inside you who believes that if they're not constantly visible, they'll cease to exist in someone else's mind. The shadow truth that nobody wants to face. The people who are most terrified of being abandoned are often the ones who abandon themselves first. Every time you drop everything to text her back immediately, you're abandoning yourself. You're abandoning the meeting you're in, the friend you're with, the project you're working on, the internal life you were cultivating. You're communicating to yourself that your presence in your own life is less important than your presence in hers. And if you don't value your own attention, if you're willing to abandon yourself at the first ping of a notification, why would she value it? This is the projection. You fear she'll abandon you, so you preemptively abandon yourself. You treat your own time, your own attention, your own presence as disposable. And then you wonder why she does the same. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This pattern you're trapped in, this compulsion to respond instantly, this anxiety when she doesn't, this sense that you're always losing ground in her interest, this isn't fate. This isn't bad luck. This is your shadow, running the show while you watch the play it's projecting. Phase 3. Shutting off the projector. Picture a river, wild and rushing. You could build a bridge, something solid and intentional, something that requires patience and self-trust. But you don't trust yourself to build it. So instead, you throw yourself into the current. You let the river carry you. You text back instantly, flooding her with availability, hoping that your constant presence will somehow get you to the other side. But rivers don't work that way. The more you thrash, the more you drown. The more you try to control the outcome through sheer effort and availability, the more desperate you appear. The bridge is the alternative. The bridge is having a life so full, so rich, so absorbing that your attention becomes naturally scarce. Not because you're playing games, but because you're genuinely occupied with your own existence. The bridge is self-trust, the belief that your worth doesn't depend on immediate responsiveness. That if she's interested, she'll still be interested in 3 hours. And if she's not, your instant reply wouldn't have changed that. But building that bridge requires you to face the shadow, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, to tolerate the anxiety of silence without immediately filling it. To trust that you're memorable enough, interesting enough, valuable enough to still exist in her mind even when you're not actively present. And that's terrifying. Because what if you're not? What if the wound is right? What if you are forgettable, replaceable, not enough? Here's what I need you to understand, that fear will never be fully resolved by external validation. No amount of instant replies, no relationship, no constant communication will ever heal the wound that says you're not inherently lovable. Because the wound isn't about reality, it's about the story you internalized before you had the capacity to question it. You could have a woman who texts you every hour, who swears she's obsessed with you, who never leaves you unread, and you'd still find something to be anxious about. You'd still check your phone compulsively. You'd still feel that hollow ache. Because the wound isn't about her behavior. It's about your relationship with yourself. Have you ever noticed that the people who seem most secure in relationships are the ones who don't need constant contact? That the ones who text back slowly, who have full lives, who don't panic at silence, they're the ones who keep attraction alive? What do they have that you don't? It's not confidence in the other person, it's confidence in themselves. It's the integrated shadow, the part of them that's made peace with the possibility of loss and decided their own presence is worth inhabiting anyway. This is shadow work, not the Instagram version, not the journaling prompts and vision boards. The real work, looking at the part of you that believes you're not enough and asking, where did this come from? Is it true? And what would change if I stopped living as if it were? What would change if you stopped trying to prevent abandonment and started building a life so compelling that your attention was genuinely scarce? What would change if you valued your own time the way you're desperate for her to value it? What would change if you turned around in that theater, walked to the back, and shut off the projector? What would you see on that stage if it wasn't lit by your fear? I'll tell you what you'd see without reality. Her actual interest or lack thereof, independent of your anxious management. The truth of whether you're compatible without the distortion of your desperate availability. The possibility of connection that's mutual, reciprocal, not based on you flooding her with attention to prevent her from leaving. But here's the part that makes this so difficult. To do that, you have to be willing to lose her. You have to be willing to find out that maybe she wasn't that interested. That maybe your instant replies were the only thing keeping the conversation alive. That maybe, without your constant effort, the connection dissolves. And that possibility, that you might discover the thing you feared is actually true, that's the terror that keeps you trapped in the pattern. But let me ask you this, would you rather live in the illusion, constantly texting, constantly available, constantly anxious, never knowing if she actually wants you or just tolerates your attention? Or would you rather face the truth, even if it's painful, and free yourself to find someone who values you without you having to work so hard to prevent them from leaving? The shadow wants you to stay safe, to keep controlling, to keep the abandonment at bay through sheer effort. But safety isn't the same as wholeness, and control isn't the same as connection. There's a paradox coming, one that flips this entire dynamic on its head. But before I show you that, you need to sit with this truth. Your texting patterns are a mirror, and what they're reflecting back isn't her interest, it's your wound. The question is, are you ready to stop running from it? Remember what I said at the start? That your instant replies don't prove you're valuable, they prove you believe you're replaceable. Here's the paradox, the thing that changes everything. The less available you are, the more valuable your attention becomes. The less you try to control her interest through constant contact, the more space you create for her to actually feel attraction. The more you abandon the strategy of preventing abandonment, the less likely you are to be abandoned. Scarcity creates value. Not manufactured scarcity, not playing games or ignoring her own purpose. Real scarcity. The kind that comes from having a life so absorbing, so meaningful, so full of purpose and presence that you're not checking your phone every 30 seconds. When you text her back 3 hours later, not because you're counting minutes, but because you were genuinely occupied with something that mattered, the meta message shifts entirely. You're no longer signaling, "I'm waiting for you." You're signaling, "I have a life that's compelling enough to compete for my attention." And you're part of that life, but you're not the axis it revolves around. And that's attractive. Because it's real. Because it communicates self-worth without having to say it explicitly. Because it shows her that your attention is something valuable, something earned, not something freely available to anyone who pings your phone. The deeper paradox, the one that most people miss. This isn't about her. It never was. The paradox isn't that making her wait increases her attraction, though it often does. The paradox is that when you stop trying to control her interest through constant availability, you finally become available to yourself. Every moment you're not compulsively checking your phone is a moment you're present in your own life. Every text you don't send immediately is a micro-affirmation that your time, your attention, your internal world matters. Every hour you let pass before responding is practice in trusting that your value doesn't depend on instant responsiveness. And the more you practice that, the more it becomes true. You begin to notice the sky, the conversation you're having in person, the work that absorbs you, the friend sitting across from you who deserves your full presence, the creative project that doesn't involve her at all, the internal landscape of your own thoughts, which gets drowned out every time you immediately shift your attention to someone else's message. You start to inhabit your life instead of waiting for hers to include you. And when you finally text her back hours later, from the fullness of your own existence, the message lands differently. Because it's no longer coming from lack. It's no longer a desperate attempt to keep the connection alive. It's coming from overflow. From a life rich enough that sharing it with her is a gift, not a need. That's when everything shifts. Because she can feel the difference. People always can. They can sense when your attention is coming from scarcity, when you need them to validate you, to fill the emptiness, to prove you're worth remembering. And they can sense when your attention is coming from abundance, when you're offering a piece of something already whole, not begging them to complete you. Which energy do you think is more magnetic? Back to the wound. Remember the scared child? The one who learned that love was conditional, that abandonment was always waiting in the silence? That child is still inside you. And that child is never going to feel safe through external validation. You could have 1,000 instant replies, 1,000 reassurances, 1,000 relationships where the other person texts back immediately, and that child would still be afraid. The only way the child feels safe is when you, the adult, turn toward them and say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." You're not alone anymore, even when the phone is silent. Even when she doesn't respond. Even when the connection fades. You're still here. We're still here, and that's enough. That's the integration. That's the shadow work that actually transforms. Not positive affirmations, not confidence tricks. The genuine turning toward of the part of you that's terrified of abandonment and choosing to be present with it anyway. And when you do that, when you stop running from the wound and start parenting it instead, the compulsion to text back instantly begins to dissolve. Not because you're forcing yourself to wait, not because you're playing games, but because you're genuinely okay with the silence, with the uncertainty, with the possibility that she might not text back. You're okay because your sense of worth is no longer dependent on her responsiveness. You've stopped outsourcing your emotional regulation to external validation. You've built the bridge. This is what it looks like in practice. She texts you. You see the notification, and instead of immediately reaching for your phone, you pause. You notice the impulse, the slight anxiety, the compulsion to respond right now. And you say to yourself, I see you, wound. I know you're afraid, but we're okay. We're not going to abandon ourselves to prevent someone else from abandoning us. And then you go back to what you were doing. The meeting, the workout, the conversation, the creative work, the moment of presence in your own life. 3 hours later, or 5, or 8, you text her back. Not because you were counting time, not because you were strategically making her wait, but because you were genuinely occupied, because your life created natural latency, because your attention is scarce, not because you manufactured it, but because you're actually living a life worth being present for. And when she receives that text, she receives something different than the instant reply. She receives your presence offered from fullness, not from fear. And that presence, that's what she'll remember. That's what creates the space for real attraction, real connection, real intimacy. Because intimacy can't exist where there's desperation. Intimacy requires two whole people choosing each other, not one person clinging to another to avoid the terror of being alone. The zero-latency signal, the instant reply, feels like connection, but it's actually preventing it. The space you create by having a full life, the natural delay, is what makes closeness possible. The less you chase, the less you'll be abandoned. The more you value your own time, the more she'll value it. The more you're willing to lose her, the more likely you are to keep her. Not because relationships are games, but because attraction isn't a negotiation. It's not something you earn through effort and availability. It's something that emerges in the space between two people who are both complete without each other, but choose each other anyway. And you can't be complete while you're abandoning yourself every time your phone buzzes. Here is what I'm asking you to do. Not as a tactic, not as a manipulation strategy, but as a practice in reclaiming your own presence. The next time she texts you, don't respond immediately. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're practicing being easy to keep by yourself. By the person who matters most in your life, you. Let the text wait. Let the anxiety rise. Let the wound scream that if you don't respond right now, you'll be forgotten. And then breathe through it. Parent the child. Remind yourself that your worth isn't measured in response time. And when you finally respond, hours later, from a place of presence instead of panic, notice how it feels. Notice if the dynamic shifts. Notice if she responds differently to your attention when it's genuinely scarce versus desperately abundant. More importantly, notice how you feel. Notice if reclaiming your time, your attention, your presence in your own life creates a sense of self-worth that no external validation ever could. That's the paradox. The thing that seems like it will cause abandonment, having a full life independent of her, is the only thing that prevents it. And the thing that seems like it will prevent abandonment being constantly available is what guarantees it. Welcome to the other side of the wound. This is where transformation begins. The integration starts now. This becomes real, practical, integrated into your actual lives. Because you can understand the psychology, you can see the shadow, you can grasp the paradox, and still find yourself reaching for your phone the moment she texts. Understanding isn't the same as embodiment. And embodiment is what we're after. Here's the integration. Not 5 tactical steps, not tricks to make her chase you, but a framework for reclaiming your presence and building a life where your attention is naturally scarce because you're genuinely occupied with your own existence. First, audit your availability. For the next week, track every time you text someone back. Note the time gap between receiving the message and sending your reply. Be honest. Are you responding within minutes? Within seconds? What's the average latency of your communication? Now ask yourself, what does this pattern reveal about how I'm spending my time? Am I genuinely busy with meaningful things, or am I just waiting? Waiting for notifications, waiting for her to text, waiting for external validation to tell me I exist. If your average response time is under 5 minutes, you have a scarcity problem. Not with her, with your life. Your attention is abundant because your life isn't occupying it. That's the real issue. Second, build competing priorities. Your attention will never feel scarce if you don't have anything competing for it. So the question becomes, what matters to you outside of her? What projects, passions, relationships, pursuits, creative endeavors are absorbing enough to pull your focus away from your phone? This isn't about faking a busy life. This is about actually building one. What have you been putting off because you've been focused on managing her interest? What part of your life have you neglected because you've been pouring all your energy into preventing abandonment in your relationships. Go back to that. The gym, the creative project, the career goal, the friendship that's been gathering dust because you've been orbiting her, the skill you've been wanting to develop, the internal life you've been avoiding by staying distracted with digital connection. When your life is genuinely full, your texting patterns will naturally shift. Not because you're trying to play games, but because you're actually occupied. Because there are moments where you genuinely don't notice the notification for hours. Because your presence in your own life is more compelling than your presence in her inbox. Third, practice the pause. This is the micro practice that rewires the compulsion. Every time you get a text from her or anyone you're anxious about, before you respond, pause. Just for 5 seconds. 5 conscious breaths. In that pause, notice the impulse, feel the anxiety, name it. There's the wound. There's the fear of abandonment. Do not judge it, do not fight it. Choose your response from a place of authority, not panic, and then make a conscious choice. Not from the wound, but from your adult self. Ask, am I responding right now because I have something meaningful to say in the space to be present? Or am I responding to regulate my anxiety? If it's the latter, put the phone down. Go back to what you were doing. Let the anxiety be there. It won't kill you. It's just a feeling. And every time you tolerate it without immediately reaching for external validation, you're rewiring the pattern. You're teaching yourself that you can be okay in the silence. Fourth, end the apology. Stop apologizing for not being instantly available. Every time you say, sorry for the late reply, you're undermining your own value. You're communicating that you believe your time should be freely available, and any delay is a failure on your part. What if instead you just didn't mention it? What if you responded hours later with no explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that time passed? Because time passing is normal. It's what happens when people have lives. The only reason you feel compelled to apologize is because you've internalized the belief that your attention should be cheap. Challenge that belief. Your time is valuable. Your attention is scarce. You don't owe anyone an apology for existing in your own life before showing up in theirs. Fifth, reframe the silence. When she doesn't text back immediately or at all, instead of filling that silence with your anxiety and projections, reframe it. Ask yourself, what if her delay has nothing to do with me? What if she's just living her life? Most of the time, that's exactly what's happening. She's not sitting there calculating how long to make you wait. She's not testing you. She's not losing interest. She's just occupied. With work, with friends, with her own internal world. When you can extend that same grace to her that you're learning to extend to yourself, the grace to exist independently, to not always be available, to have a life that creates natural latency, you stop taking every delay as evidence of abandonment. And when you stop taking it personally, you stop feeling the compulsion to control it through constant contact. You relax into the rhythm of two people who have their own lives and choose to share them, rather than two people who need each other to feel whole. Sixth, inhabit the discomfort. Here's the hard part. This integration isn't comfortable. It's going to feel wrong at first. Every time you let a text sit for hours, every time you choose presence in your own life over immediate responsiveness, the wound is going to scream at you. It's going to tell you that you're making a mistake, that you're being rude, that you're going to lose her, that if you don't respond right now, she'll forget you exist. Let it scream. That's not truth, it's trauma. It's the echo of the original wound trying to keep you safe by keeping you small, by keeping you available, by preventing you from risking the very thing you're terrified of. But you can't heal what you won't feel, so feel it. Sit with the discomfort. Let the anxiety rise without reaching for your phone to make it stop. Every time you do this, you're proving to yourself that you can survive the thing you feared, that abandonment isn't death, that you're still here, still whole, even when she doesn't text back. Seventh, notice the shift. As you practice this, as you build a life that genuinely competes for your attention, as you stop abandoning yourself to prevent her from abandoning you, pay attention to what changes. Not just with her, though you'll likely notice that too. When your attention becomes scarce, people tend to value it more. When you stop chasing, they often start pursuing. When you stop managing the connection through constant availability, there's space for them to actually miss you. But more importantly, notice what changes in you. Notice if you feel more grounded, more present, more like yourself. Notice if your sense of worth starts to come from internal sources instead of external validation. Notice if you can breathe a little easier, even when the phone is silent. That's the real integration. Not her response, your presence, your return to yourself. Because here's what this was always about. You've been using instant texting to avoid feeling the wound, to distract yourself from the terror of aloneness, to prove over and over that you're still here, still visible, still worth remembering. But the only person who needs to remember your worth is you. The only presence that can heal the wound is your own. The only validation that will ever be enough is the validation you give yourself by choosing to be in your own life fully, even when it's uncomfortable. When you do that, when you reclaim your attention from the compulsion to give it away constantly, you stop being the person who needs the relationship to feel whole. You become the person who chooses the relationship from wholeness. And that person doesn't text back instantly. Not because they're playing games, but because they have somewhere to be, someone to be. And that someone is themselves. One final thought. The next time your phone buzzes, before you reach for it, ask yourself, what am I choosing right now? Am I choosing her presence or my own? Because you can't have both simultaneously. Every instant reply is a choice to abandon yourself in favor of managing someone else's perception of you. Every pause, every delay, every moment you stay present in your own life is a choice to value your own time the way you're desperate for her to value it. Only one choice honors the wound by healing it, rather than endlessly running from it. You already know the answer. You've known it since the moment you felt that hollow ache after hitting send too quickly. You've known it every time you checked your phone compulsively. Every time you apologized for being human. Every time you abandon yourself to prevent someone else from abandoning you. The wound doesn't heal through constant availability. It heals through presence. Your presence. In your own life. Right here. Right now. So put the phone down. Feel the discomfort. Let the text wait. Let yourself matter enough to occupy your own attention. And when you finally text her back, hours later, from the fullness of a life you're actually living, you won't be sending a message from the wound. You'll be sending it from the person you're becoming. The person who knows their worth isn't measured in response time. The person who's built a bridge instead of drowning in the river. The person who's turned off the projector and stepped onto the stage of their own life. That person doesn't need to text back instantly, because that person already knows they're worth remembering. You do.